Right on time,
Uh,
Dave. Can you hear me okay?
yes, I can. Let me just
Thank
turn
you.
you
Have you always been the punctual, on time one of the band?
on. No, not always. No, not always. We all have our moments, but yeah, I booked this room specially, so it was relatively easy.
I can imagine. Well, before I ask you about London Bridge, I was wondering if it is fair to call you the Stuart Copeland of Blur. And by that, I mean the multi instrumentalist who has all the interesting hobbies outside of music, and you don't always realize that it's the same person who's doing all that stuff.
Well, I've certainly had an interesting and varied career. Let's
Yeah,
put it that way. Yep, I've done lots of things. I've got lots of interests. Um, so yeah, I'll certainly concede that much. Don't know
that
much about Stuart Copeland actually. I don't know what his interests are, so maybe we are the same. I don't suppose many people know what my interests are.
Well, hey, finding success as a director, composing for different projects, politics, the wonderful nonprofit work that you do related to recovery, et cetera, et cetera. You don't really realize, like, hey, that's the same guy who's from a multi platinum band that's had a career for 30-ish years. And so, taking those compliments from me right there, was it the goal all along to have this varied of a career at the beginning, or did it just organically happen?
No, not really. I don't. I've never really had a plan, to be honest. That's why it pings around all over the place. Never had a plan. Always done what seemed most interesting at the time, and I've discovered fairly early on that when you could take an interest in something. These things don't have to hit you and be somehow inherently interesting. And actually, I very much doubt whether there is anything that is fundamentally inherently interesting. I think interest is something taken by the beholder, like beauty is in the mind of the beholder. Interested
Sure.
is also in the mind of the beholder, and so I discovered that by a bit of kind of application and determination and having taken a decision, you could become interested in almost anything. Find something interesting in almost anything, shall we say?
That interest in the eye of the beholder, did you just come up with that one? I've never heard that, and that is so applicable to everything.
Yeah, I just thought of it there and then, like most of the sentences I use.
Write it down. I'm not asking for half the publishing. That one is all yours for the next album. But
I'm
you
sure
know,
there's a cuter way of putting that, but anyway, that's what I discovered, and that's been my kind of mantra really, looking for the interesting angle in things. What is it I can learn from this? And so I've done all kinds of things. Fundamentally, there's been a kind of guiding principle, a couple of guiding principles really,
mhm.
all of which are applicable to the record. Um, my I come from a kind of rather chaotic family, shall we say, which I'm not certainly not going to go into. But one of the less chaotic things about my growing up was the time I used to spend with my dad, and both he used to be a radio engineer in the RAF, and so electronics was his baby, and so he and I used to sit around the kitchen table building radios together, and that was, some dads took their sons to the football, while my dad and I built radios, and then we would listen, we would build them. We had a big long wire aerial in the back garden, and we would build different kinds of radios, and then connect them to this wire aerial and see what we could tuning in stations from all over the world. And that became a kind of that idea of tuning in stations from all over the world,
Mhm.
that was a big motivator for me. It was something I did a lot growing up, and it changed my life in a lot of ways, and is the reason the album is called Radio Songs.
Right.
Um, First off, I grew up in a small British town on the east coast, a nowhere town. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's not famous for anything. Nothing happens there. Maybe I'm doing it a disservice. It used to be in the Roman times. It was the capital of England, But since then, its notoriety has gone downhill somewhat.
When that happens, a good thing about it is you get the street or the area named after you. Is there a Dave Rowntree Plaza
I
as a result of
doubt.
that?
I sincerely doubt it. I sincerely doubt it. But um, the radio was my kind of window to the world outside, this small town where I grew up. It was, I would lie awake at night, tuning through the dial, flicking the dial, tuning in all these stations from all over the world, listening to the weird and wonderful music and the languages that were being spoken, and just kind of dreaming of a world outside my bedroom. And one of those stations that I came across was Radio Moscow. Radio Moscow used to have, maybe they still do, an English language news service. And my dad, like many people who was in the RAF, the RAF is the aeroplanes part of the armed forces, and
Right.
it's a very technical service, as you can imagine. If you're not a pilot, you're doing something very high tech and interesting. And when he demobbed, as with many of the RAF, they all joined the BBC, which was the kind, we're talking the 60s, I guess, 50s, 60s, when the BBC was just growing, and people with technical skills were looking for somewhere to go. So my dad worked for the BBC. We had the kind of uh, the kind of right of centre, I suppose, centre right newspapers delivered every morning. And it never occurred to me that there was a different world view other than the one presented on the BBC News and in these centre-right newspapers.
Yeah.
Just never occurred to me. Nobody had ever told me there was. And then I listened to Radio Moscow, and Radio Moscow was clearly berserk. This world view was clearly had some issues, but that was my political awakening, really. The idea that even though Radio Moscow wasn't a particularly a creditable news source, there was more than one alternate perspective on the world events. It was
Sure.
possible to draw different conclusions from the same events. That was, as a kid, that was like a wow moment, really. I never even realized. Of course, there is. And that was my political awakening, really. So, radio when I called this album Radio Songs, I didn't do it because I meant songs to be played on the radio, though hopefully there will be. But it was really because radio, for that and many other reasons, has been a kind of constant in my life, and it has been there for me in various ways,
Yeah.
through the years. So that's the kind of that's sort of one side of things. I guess the other side, and so that's spawned all kinds of interest in electronics and computers that sustain me to this day, amateur radio, all this kind of stuff, making things. I'm a maker. Long before being a maker was a thing, I've always built my own studio gear and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I suppose the other is when I was approaching middle age. I have to say, sadly, I've now approached middle age. But when I was on the entrance ramp to middle age, just deciding, whether to join, which lane to join, um, I had a bit of a crisis, as many men do, and I think the reason for mine was I I'd lived a very odd life, being been in a band for most of my adult life,
Yeah.
and
Seeing all the world in your 20s, 30s, 40s. I get
yeah,
it. So many
yeah, yeah,
unique experiences and so many late nights out, to say the least.
yeah, and but I believe passionately that music has a power a very, very powerful thing, has the power to transform individuals and all of that kind of stuff. But you don't really see that in a band. It's not like being a music therapist. You basically, when you're actually creating the music, you're locked away in a studio. There's you for the producer and maybe somebody making the tea, and that's it. You see these people, same people for months on end.
Right.
When you're playing on stage, especially when you're successful, there's hundreds of thousands of people out there. If you say hello, they all scream.
Yeah.
Kind of it's another thing. Again, it's fantastic, and I absolutely love it. I wouldn't stop doing that for the world. It's not you don't get a sense of kind of making a distant difference in people's lives, and I found after some experimentation and some wrong turns, it has to be said that was what I was missing in my life. So a lot of what I've done, perhaps in the should we say the second half of my life, has been about trying to find that those spaces in which I can one-on-one help people, look them in the eye, and try and transform their lives for them in some way. So that's what led me to joining the Labour Party and being activists, running for office in various ways. That's what led me to becoming a solicitor. Um, I guess the one thing that I can't explain is the animation thing. That's just bizarre. I just, but
Well,
honestly,
Todd
think
Rundgren did the animation thing. We've seen Rudy Sarzo from Quiet Riot's a big animator. There's a good number of people who do that crossover and just see it as it's so different from sitting in a bus, and it's so
yeah,
different from waiting in airports, and so creatively fulfilling, and
yeah.
also aids into their computer skills, like being early computer adapters. Did you start off in computer assisted animated
Oh,
project?
absolutely, and that's always been my thing. 3D animation, Toy Story-esque 3D animation, and I've always been on the kind of technical edge of that, as well as producing finished work for various people. So I've been one of the people writing animation software and stuff. Um, but yes, I guess I just got kind of captivated by it, and it was in the 90s. I quit drinking 25 years ago at least. You wouldn't believe it from some of my behaviour, but I honestly did. And I found that one of the things that alcohol does for a touring musician is enables them to get to sleep at night. Obviously, after having a punch up and being sick on
That
whoever
too.
they've brought back to their room. But after that, they get to sleep at night. And so I found for literally years I was dreadfully insomniac, terrible. And I'm over it now, I can reassure you. But what I discovered was that if you're insomniac, you can either fight against it and kind of tossing and turning. Oh God, I can't believe I can't get to sleep. Oh Christ! Look, it's 6 o'clock in the morning now, and I still haven't had any sleep. You can
Yeah.
do that, and I did that for a long time. Or you can just go, oh well, I'm not going to sleep. Might as well get up there and get up. And I found that those early morning hours were magical, really, really magical hours. That kind of 2, 3, 4 in the morning when the world stops and you can fully concentrate on something. You can give it 100% of your concentration. And so I've been intrigued by animation, and I would thought, I wonder how they do that. How can you bring something to life and give it personality? How does that work? So this was back in the VHS cassettes days, and I had some Warner Brothers cartoons on VHS cassette, and you could flick through it a frame at a time. So I just spent for months on end those early morning hours flicking through these cartoons a frame at a time.
Hmm.
Oh, I see. That's how you do that. That's interesting. And this was at the beginning, I guess, of the time when you could start to do those kind of high tech things on ordinary-ish computers. You could spend a few £1,000s on a computer, and you could run the professional software. I mean, up until a few years before that, you needed to spend £1 million on a so now you
Oh
can
yeah.
spend £1,000 on a computer. So that was and a few years later you could do it on a laptop. But
The
that was just
technology
that
keeps
transitional
becoming
time.
half the price and half the
Yeah,
size
more
over
and
and over
more.
and over again, to the point that
Yeah.
you can animate while you're just waiting on something, waiting on your coffee.
Oh, you could do it on your. I mean, your phone is infinitely more powerful than my computer was in those days, most definitely. But yeah, so that I was interested in how it worked and how I could do it, and so I spent those. In many ways, that insomnia was a blessing, really, because you know, I just rediscovered the joy in all kinds of things. Learning especially. As a young kid, I loved learning, just loved it, just luxuriated in it. And I went to this school where it was all about the joy of learning, and then I went to the next school where it was all about rote learning, and there was no joy involved, and that kind of
Yeah.
finished that for me. And that was when I sort of gave up school. Really, did the minimum I had to do to get away.
Yeah.
But those kind of early morning hours, I rediscovered the joy of exploring something, and turning something over intricate in your hands just for the sheer pleasure of it. And that's something I've continued to do ever since. So a lot of the things, a lot of the obsessions I've got, I've passed exams in, you know, flying and amateur radio and all kinds of other stuff. I've I've just decided to take exams in it all, you know, and kind of just for the sheer fun of it, really. So yeah, that's where all the chaos comes from. It all comes from somewhere, you know. It all seems fairly rational to me, but I can see from the outside it must seem berserk.
No, no, you're speaking my language. And bring it back to the kudos related to your solo album. London
Yeah,
Bridge is the first song that most people are going to hear from it, have heard from it.
yeah.
Sometimes artists put out a song because they go, well, that's the first one that was written, the first one that was done. And other times somebody goes, no, that's the hook. Uh, why or how did London Bridge become that focal point? Was that Cooking Vinyl saying this is the single?
Well, I took lots of advice from lots of people, most definitely. Cooking Vinyl had an input to it, and you know, I asked people I know in radio what they thought the first single should be. Fundamentally, you have to go with your gut, don't you? Really,
Sure.
with these things, and I think there are no tracks on the album that are kind of representative of the album as a whole. It isn't really that kind of an album. It's cohesive, but it's made of many disparate parts. So there wasn't anything, you know, there wasn't like a title track. You know, there was no track called Radio Songs or anything. So I just thought, well, you know, I want to get out of the box with something that's got loads of hooks that people are going to want to hear. That's something that might stand a chance of getting on the radio. Um, you know, I want people to be talking about it because the you know, it's the first part of the campaign where you get to make a splash, really.
Right.
Later in your career, you can afford, as Damon always does, to put a completely misdirection track out. You know, a kind of
Just one?
Bulgarian choir, you know, with somebody
Yeah.
beatboxing behind it or something. And everyone goes, "Oh, this new album's going to be really weird." And then he puts it out, and you know, it's something entirely different. You could afford to have that luxury after a while, but for this one, first album, first single off the first album, I wanted to make people sit up and listen. And especially many people in the Blur fandom know I was making an album. Uh, Nobody had any idea what it was going to sound like. And
That's
so,
a good point. People were excited to hear that music from you, and they knew, hey, this is a guy that plays a bit of every instrument, but we don't know what it sounds like. So it's cool to hear that it's a significant, meaningful solo album. The story that you just told about how your childhood experience of building radios with your father and listening to that, and how radio inspired you, not just, you know, politically, musically, I have to assume comedically too, because comedy came to me from the radio. That's a wonderful, wonderful story. That's, in fact, that's a little too great of a story as opposed to these are 10 songs I had sitting around.
yeah, but you know, there are mundane aspects to it as well. You know, the songs weren't written with any particular project in mind. You know, I'd signed a new publishing deal with this great company in the UK, and there's a really switched on guy there that believes in just setting up random co-writes between two, not really random, but you know, setting up co-writes between pairs of writers on his label. He says, never a waste of time. You never know what's going to happen. You know, and I. I love to, you know, music is a collaborative thing to do for me. I love to collaborate on musical ideas. So that was music to my ears. So I just went along with it, you know. And I've written a lot of songs in the past, but again, not really. It's just an itch that you scratch as a musician, I think, rather than anything else. But anyway, so I just started writing, and he had a bunch of very eclectic writers on his label, and things really, you know, really started working really well. Ended up with kind of, you know, 15, 20 songs, most of which were quite good, and that's a good hit rate. You know, normally you expect, well, for especially the early in your career, you have to write, you know, 10 tracks for each decent one. You
Right.
know, I was getting like a 50% hit rate with this, or better with these writers. And so I think, wow, this is, and I was thinking about, it was at the time there was lots of things happening in the UK, and the things that my childhood coming to relief for various reasons, and this kind of stuff was going on. So I had a lot churning around in my head, and very cathartic to write all this out. And it's you're a writer too, are you not? And you know that the difficulty in writing is the first word. That's the hardest one,
Yes.
isn't it? Kind of. It's a bit of downhill from there on, but it's like, God, what am I going to write? Oh Christ, how am I going to? What am I even? I don't even know why I'm doing this. I can't do this. What am I going to write? But
But
getting.
you have, and you did continually.
I did. Yeah, yeah.
I look at
But
your
you're forced to. When you
discography.
have a co-write, you're forced to do it. There's a deadline attached to it then. So it's like you can easily spend the whole day going, I can't even do this. You can spend a whole day doing. You can spend a week doing that. But if you got a co-write on Thursday, you've got to come up with something. You can't turn up with nothing. So it was liberating. You know what I mean? I had some dates in the diary. I had to come up with stuff. And you have to, as I'm sure you know, you have to give yourself permission for it to be crap. For otherwise, you would never start. If it has to be great to start with, you will never ever start. So
Permission.
so you have to say, all right, the first thing I'm going to write is always crap. So let's just get on with it. What's the crappiest thing you can write? Okay, moon in June, blah 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 blah. There you go. Oh, it's absolute crap. Actually, those last few words work quite well together. And if I put that over what I wrote yesterday and blah blah, blah then you're up and running. So anyway, so it was great. It was very very liberating, and I ended up with most of the songs written in a fairly short period, actually, that way. So the kind of lyrical musings are all around around sort of similar thoughts that were going through my head at the time, and the music kind of sounds relatively cohesive. They're all songs. They're all kind of meaningful.
Hmm. Well, two quick questions, then I'm going to let you roam free. And these might be
Yeah,
10-second answers, or these might be 2-minute answers. The
I don't
first,
give 10-second answers as you've gathered. You didn't even ask me a question. I talked for 20 minutes flat. You didn't even say
no,
anything. You didn't even say hello.
no, this was a
Good
good
luck with your
TED
10
talk.
second answers.
Well, the first one I got for you is blur like means different things in different countries. Like in some countries, you're a stadium act. In some countries, it's like a theater act, but you'd sell out the theater in 20 seconds. In some countries, it's just the most mainstream thing. In other things, it's more of a cult following. And I have to assume you accomplished so much more than you ever set out to. But is there anything that you haven't accomplished that you're still hoping might happen? Because, putting yourself here in New York, you can't go to a sporting event without hearing song too. Like it won't die whether or not the people know that that's Blur. It's just such a cultural impact. But is there anything you're still hoping will happen for you or Blur?
Well, I think our best album, this is such a middle-aged bloke in a band thing to say, but I think our best album is still ahead of us. I really do. I think we're
Oh,
just getting the hang of it, really. After all these years, we're just figuring out how to do it. And actually, it takes far less effort than we thought it did. I think what we found in the last album, which admittedly was quite a long time ago, was that much like I was describing to you with um, how I wrote the songs on my album, it's a matter of having the time in the diary and the determination to do it.
sure.
It doesn't really matter how much time you put in the diary. It's the kind of the hard bit is the creativity. You can do the mopping up later. You can do the boring bit later on. you know, Coming up with the creative ideas, filling in the blanks in them, all of that stuff. I mean, we did all of that with the last album in a week in Hong Kong. You know what I mean? We didn't come out with an album, far from it. But there was all the mopping up and the editing and all the re-recording and blah, blah, and the writing of the lyrics and all of that is a longer process. But that's not the, I can't say the writing of the lyrics, but all of that other stuff isn't the difficult bit. That's the bit that the producer helps you with, and
Hmm.
gives you three options and you pick one kind of thing. All the creative stuff, how does this go to the chorus, and where are the hooks? We got enough hooks, all of that kind of stuff. That's the hard stuff. But it's actually quite quick to do. Maybe that's just because we've been working together for 30 years and it's gone quick
Right.
to do.
Complex relationships. Well, I'm glad to hear that you still want to put the push the artistic envelope forward. And the last thing I have for you, and this might be the quickest no that I've ever gotten, was Van
Will you
Halen.
marry me? No. Okay.
Was Van Halen in any way a musical influence on you and or Blur? I couldn't figure that out.
Well, I'm racking my brains to see if there is any conceivable way that Van Halen has been an influence on any of us ever. And I'm struggling to think of any aspect of Van Halen's career that's informed any aspect of ours in any positive kind of way. And I'm struggling to think of one.
This
I'm
is
not, I'm not dissing him
confirming.
as an artist. I don't do that, but you know, we have the Venn diagram of the various artistic endeavor. You know, you could do the Brian Eno overlapping Blur Venn diagram. There'd be something there, not huge, but there'd be something there. You know, the David Bowie, that's rather larger. In fact, the two go nearly concentric circles in some aspects. But the Van Halen one, yeah, I'm struggling to think. Why do you ask?
I'm slowly writing a book about David Lee Roth. I was trying to see how could I shoehorn Dave into this book, but that ain't happening.
We'll just put that Venn diagram in the Blur versus David Lee Roth Venn diagram. I'm fine with that. You can have that.
Well, the bottom line is thank you for the many years of great music. I love what I've heard of this new album. Glad to hear
Right.
that, the door is not closed on Blur, wanting to do the
Oh,
best
no,
album it's
no.
ever done, and glad that you're still interesting as the Stuart Copeland of Blur all these years later.
I wonder how Stuart Copeland would feel about it. He'd probably be scandalised. David who? David who?
I'm sure he'd be flattered that another successful multi-instrumentalist is in the same conversation. But whatever it is, I'm looking forward to it coming from you next, Dave.
Cheers, Darren. Very nice to see you.
Paltrow.